I'm here at St. Patrick's Cathedral, one of the countless churches and cathedrals both here in Ireland and around the world that are named after St. Patrick. On top of that, we have soccer clubs like St. Patrick's Athletics, we have rugby clubs, we have Gaelic football clubs, we have hurling clubs, all named after St. Patrick. There's no evidence that he ever was involved in any of those sports. Maybe he saw a little hurling at one stage, but we certainly know that he was involved in adventure racing. In fact, we have documentation. In his autobiography are details of one of the greatest adventure races of all times, and we're going to delve into the details of that, so stick around and prepare to be amazed. First off, to give a little bit of historical context to the era, Ireland at that stage was just coming out of the Irish Dark Ages, a period from about 100 BC to 300 AD. Scotland had a similar era, and it's believed that Roman Britain raided Ireland and the Pict area of Scotland in particular for slaves. Roman Britain was built around towns and villas, but for these to operate under the Roman economy, they needed a fresh supply of slaves on a regular basis. But by the time around 300 AD comes around, Ireland's back on the ascendancy and is starting into a golden era, and Britain's on the decline. Things start to go wrong for the Roman Britons when the wonderfully named Magnus Maximus draws troops from what's current-day Wales on a line up towards Cumbria in 383. From then on, society in Roman Britain slowly starts to crumble. It's not immediate. Patrick grows up just after this era as part of that privileged echelon of Roman society. In his own autobiography, he gives us accounts of idleness and what we can only assume is a misspent youth. But at the age of 16, he's out with some companions and they're ambushed by Irish slavers. Before he knows it, he's bundled up and he's on a boat across the Irish Sea, and he's bought by Milcou. Patrick then spent the next 6 years as a slave on a mountain just like the one behind me here. According to Irish legend, it was Slieve-Mish or Slimish in County Antrim was the mountain, and on that mountain he was herding sheep and pigs. Of course, what he didn't know was this was the perfect training ground for being an adventure racer. He was up and down these mountains every day. If you've ever tried to herd pigs, you'll know all about it. And he was out in all sorts of weather. He had none of the gear like this. He complains in his writing about being naked. I don't know if he was actually naked, but I think we can assume that he, was poorly attired. Of course, he was building up deep reserves of brown fat, and I think it's safe to assume that he was probably barefoot. So he was into minimalist footwear way before it became popular again 1600 years later. From Slimish, he could see something that was really important to his eventual escape. There was a hint of blue in the background that was Loch Ness, a huge expanse of inland water, and I personally believe that that was a key critical control point for him on his initial escape from Ireland. We can only guess at his routing on his escape across Ireland. What we do know is that he made impressive time. He covered 300 kilometers by his own accounts in 3 days, and obviously some of that would have been in hostile areas. Possibly when he got outside the area of the tribe that he was kept a slave in, going might have been a little bit easier, but he certainly wouldn't have wanted to hang around. Assuming that he picked up Loch Ness as his first critical control point, he would have followed the shoreline of that south, and from there would have gone down through possibly the Gap of Ulster, making his way through from what's current day Newry towards Dundalk direction. Possibly would have crossed the river a little higher, and then from there possibly made his way south on one of the roads that headed towards Tara. There was 5 major roads, all made their way towards Tara at that point. From there he would have again gone south, probably crossing the Liffey a little further east than present day Dublin, and then maybe skirted the Wicklow Mountains, and legend has it that he departed from Wicklow. This was all done in 3 days, so we have to assume that a lot of it was done at night, and you know, even by current day standards, it was decent going. When Patrick got to Wicklow, he was about to start the second stage of his amazing adventure. He now had to cross the Irish Sea back to Britain. It was probably on a boat not much larger than this, and I think it's safe to assume that he had to work for his passage and was probably rowing for a lot of the 3-day crossing that was involved. We know that there was wolfhounds on the boat, and that Patrick was a calming influence on that, so maybe he got a little bit of relief from the rowing side of things. There may have been a sail on the boat, but it was probably rudimentary, and there would have certainly been a significant amount of physical exertion in getting across the Irish Sea. So certainly a very, very difficult journey in 416. One of the most unusual passages of Patrick's race report is his account of nipple sucking. I know that sounds really, really weird by today's standards, but sucking at the chieftain's or the chief's nipple was a common way to show respect in early Gaelic and Celtic societies. When chieftains or taoiseachs got initiated at the head of their clan or tribe, the Taoiseach or the underlings in the clan would suckle on the chieftain's nipple as a way of showing their respect and acknowledging his power. And when Patrick got to the boat, the captain asked him to suckle on his nipple to show this. Patrick flat out refused because he saw it very much as a pagan practice and wanted nothing of it. So he was initially denied crossing of the Irish Sea. However, his skills with the wolfhounds meant that the crew persuaded the captain to still allow Patrick on the boat, and that's how he managed to eventually flee the island of Ireland and escape slavery. By the time Patrick gets back and lands in Britain, even in the 6 years that have gone by, society and towns are starting to crumble everywhere, and it just adds to the confusion that is his journey. When Patrick and the crew of the ship land in Britain, they now hit a problem that's familiar with many adventure racers: navigation. They've no maps, they've no GPS, and they spend the next 30 odd days somehow making their way through Britain, assuming that they landed somewhere in Wales. He was trying to make his way back to possibly Cumbria. Towards the end of this, they're all extremely hungry. Even the dogs are on the verge of starvation, and there is a breakdown in the team. People start to doubt the captain, they start to doubt Patrick, they make fun of him as being a Christian. Patrick in his account starts to pray, and suddenly they come across a herd of wild boar, and they manage to feast for a few days, regain their strength, and he makes it back home to his parents. And that's the end of this particular adventure race for Patrick. It's been 40 days. He's had a extremely dangerous section in Ireland. He's had 3 days at sea, which has to have been arduous as well. And then he's got another 34 days making his way somehow through Britain. Society in Britain at that stage had pretty much completely broken down, and it must have been an extremely hazardous journey at that point. 16 years later, Patrick is now a bishop. He returns to Ireland. We don't know much about what happened to him for those 16 years, but we certainly have a huge number of accounts of his times and travels in Ireland. He clearly has the spirit of adventure still. We have accounts of him banishing snakes, but we also have even more fantastical accounts of him fighting monsters in lakes. So like Loch Derg in County Donegal, he was supposed to have killed the serpent that lived in that. We also have him spending 40 days on Croagh Patrick, so he still obviously has a love for the mountains. And we're pretty certain that he travelled widely throughout Ireland. There are place names named after him pretty much from North Cork all the way to the top of Antrim and right across the country. So he must have been constantly traveling with a band of disciples, and there are so many peaks, rivers, holy wells like the one here behind me, all named after him, and his adventures continued. So it's clear to me that Patrick was an extraordinary adventure racer. He didn't know he was an adventure racer, but by modern day standards, I think he would have been, you know, a fantastic addition to any team. He clearly had the spirit of adventure all throughout his life, a love of the mountains, of the woods, of the great outdoors, and he clearly had, you know, what it took when he needed to put everything on the line to complete one of the greatest adventure races of all time. So I don't think there's anything left except to toast to the man himself, the original and possibly one of the greatest adventure racers of all time. It's the eve of St. Patrick's Day, and I think there's nothing more but to have a beer that I learned how to put together many moons ago when I lived in the United States. Irish people used to make fun of this at one time, but I think it's fantastic, and I think it brings out that sense of fun. So the secret is just get a nice light beer, chill it down pretty well, and that's it. So happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone out there, and we hope you have a wonderful year of adventure racing ahead. And here's to St. Patrick.
St. Patrick.